The University of Manitoba campuses and research spaces are located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Ininiwak, Anishinaabe, Dakota Oyati, Dene, and Inuit, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. U of M recognizes that the treaties signed on these lands are a lifelong, enduring relationship, and we are dedicated to upholding their spirit and intent.
Welcome back to the Media Lab podcast. In this series, Beyond the Prompt, we are exploring dangers and opportunities of AI technology, especially in education. And with me today is Dr. Melentie Pandilovski. Melentie Pandilovski is a phenomenologist, art theorist, and historian. He's also a great curator and art director. And his work bridges art, culture, science, and technology. He's curated more than 200 exhibitions, written extensively on art and media philosophy. And I think he's ideal guest to discuss how emerging technologies are reshaping artistic practice and also human perception. Melentie, I'm so happy you're with us today.
Thank you, Monica. It's really great to be here.
Okay, awesome. So you're in Australia right now, right?
Yes, I live in Melbourne.
Exactly. So I'm so glad we synchronized because of the time difference and everything. So as I mentioned, you've worked on the intersection of art, science, and technology for most of your career. Can you tell me a little bit what art can reveal about new technologies that science can't?
Well, that's a great question. So, as you know, science is amazing, really, at measuring, predicting, and explaining. But art does something slightly different. It explores the felt truth of technology. So, art shows us how technology inhabits us emotionally, psychologically, as well as culturally. And it reveals, in a Heideggerian sense, it reveals the subtle shifts in perception and consciousness, which science can't always capture. So, in a sense, art humanizes technology. It doesn't just illustrate it, it interrogates it, and it makes us feel its impact in a very immediate way. What fascinates me is how emerging technologies, AI, biotechnology, immersive media, are reshaping the way we experience the world. And as you said, I do curate exhibitions that try to show not just the technology itself, but how it changes the way we see, how we feel, how we exist. It's really about understanding human experience in a world that's transforming incredibly fast.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of this, do you have any project that you're currently working on that kind of fit with the topic? Or what are you up to recently?
Um, yeah, it's I always have a lot of projects. Lately, I've been also working with visual arts. I curated an exhibition in Macedonia, the Contemporary Art Museum, of an Argentinian artist. I would say Argentinian Australian artist who lives in Berlin. Yeah, his name is Ariel Hassan, and he's really an interesting artist. With him, I've worked a lot of on art and technology, specifically in Gambier for the Video Art Festival. But in Skopje, we did something else. It's called The Tragedy of Equality. It's really an interesting project which happened in Berlin, in Adelaide, in Tokyo, and in Skopje was the last iteration. We'll see where we'll take it further on. But the whole concept of understanding quality, whether that's at all possible, and interrogating it. In Skopje, it was a bit of a platform, which was like we had to construct it at the museum. and we had two arm wrestlers that were wrestling, but there was a cylinder and it was a bit tilted, and nobody could really win. They didn't,
Mm.
yeah, and yeah, it was really fascinating. So yeah, I'm working on different levels of interaction between arts and technology and arts and science, I would say.
Hmm. I saw videos on that on the exhibition in Skopje. It looked very
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
the one thing I'm aware of with your work, because you used to work at Video Pool in Winnipeg, and you did a lot of
Yes.
projects here. And actually, that's how I ended up here, because I came for the conference on McLuhan and Husserl. Um, but one thing, because my supervisor, Polona Tretnik, whom you know very well as well from Slovenia, she works with biotech art. She's like biotech artist. And so you have, you know, and you've collaborated in projects, or curated projects that um, kind of explore these tensions and intersections between body or biological matter and technology, right?
Mm.
And the examples would, of course, the obvious examples is like Eduardo Katz, Moon Rebus is one that I really like, and then Stellark, whom you still work with Stellark, right?
Yeah.
But I kind of notice a shift happening. To me, it seems like we're shifting from this view of the body as a machine, as like, oh, brain is a computer, and kind of, everything kind of as a separate mechanism, that just a part, like different parts of like a bigger mechanism and so on. And I think it's more shifting towards machine have to become more like organic body, because now the evidence of this is the rise of biocomputing, neural links, wetware interfaces. Um, how do you see this trajectory unfolding in art?
That's a very interesting question, and I agree with you absolutely. I mean, what's fascinating for me is that the biological and technological are no longer separate, so they're co-evolving. So the artists which you mentioned, including Stellar, they show us that the body can be extended, can be augmented, even questioned through technology, and the machine itself is no longer just a tool; it becomes a kind of a partner. So I think we're moving towards what you would call symbiotic systems, right? Where humans and technology co-create new forms of life and perception. And honestly, it's both exciting and at times a little unsettling, I would say.
Yeah, where do you
Uh,
see AI fitting into this? Do you have an
well,
opinion on that?
AI is, I mean, the thing with the AI is we don't really understand it yet. Nobody really understands it. I mean, in China, they've mounted this whole system of surveillance, the whole society, right? And
Mm,
with cameras and all that. And they've used AI, of course, in order to be able to do that. But they're, like at the end, the system isn't actually working. It's not possible to do it, and
right.
and 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 the bottom line of this whole thought experiment is that we don't, I mean, or at least the Chinese government doesn't they've realized that they don't understand AI, that they don't understand the limits of
Wow.
AI and where
Right.
AI can go and how it's I think we're still at the beginning, right? Even though we think that we've done a big leap, but I think we're still at the beginning of it. And I remember, the old days when I don't know, just artists were involved in AI. In the 60s and so on. And it was
Mm,
quite fascinating because there was a lot of poetic poetics in the development of AI. Now we've moved to this, very technological phase, and just like trying to create these, the bigger systems, the better we think. But is it? I think time will tell. But I think the most important thing is to understand it properly, and then we can move on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, to understand it. And I mean, in my opinion, obviously, is, and I believe yours as well, that arts can really help us kind of unmask some of these hidden mechanisms behind AI. Because I feel like, the scientific PR, it's always just shedding light on certain aspects of it, like mostly positive, and then they introduce negative. It's like, well, there, of course, we have to be careful about the ethics, and we have to be careful, but they never explore those far enough. And I think, for example, artists like Trevor Paglen and Julian Oliver, they extensively kind of exposed the surveillance systems, or like, systems of
Yes.
surveillance and control, right? And I haven't seen a lot of this kind of stuff. Like, for example, when Snowden revelations happened, I feel like there was a lot of discussion on these topics. But now I think it's kind of dying out again. I feel like everybody's kind of like, oh, we can't win. People became kind of like more complacent. Yeah, what do you think? Do you think art can kind of rekindle this conversation, especially now that a lot of artists are becoming concerned with, AI stealing their work to create like new images and so on? What's your opinion on this?
I think there are basically two things, and so I might digress a little bit and move back to the development of biotechnology, and then when artists started working with biotechnology, when they started, creating bioart. And what struck me was that the ethical issues, which you pointed out, always came from the side of the artists or the side of the humanities. They never really came from the side of the sciences.
Mm-hmm.
So the scientists were much less worried about the ethical aspects, in my experience,
For
than
sure.
the artists. Uh, and I don't see why it would be different with AI, because really the idea of the sciences is to take the development to the utmost possible extension. And but of course, ethics then steps in, and if it's not for the humanities, if it's not for the artists, we wouldn't have who to um, rely on really in this whole system.
Mm-hmm.
But that's like one level, ethics. But then there is another level is the ontological level, and really understanding AI, and really understanding, I mean, I mentioned biotechnology, but AI and biotech are mirrors in a way.
Mm-hmm.
They show not only what we can do, but also what we desire and what we fear. So in the creating of technologies, as we do, what's happening is they increasingly resemble us, right? And in doing so, they reveal our values and anxieties. So technology is being, as you know, the old phenomenological maxim that technology and society co-constitute each other,
Mm-hmm.
but it's proving true, right? So then what happens with human identity? And in this context, I would say it's becoming more fluid.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a fixed state anymore. So the more we integrate technology into, let's say, biology, the more being human becomes an ongoing negotiation rather than something stable or predefined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, and like just kind of shift to this idea that, yeah, before we were always like, oh, technology is like very separate from us as, our bodies and us as humans. And then, of course, McLuhan and others even before him were like, well, technology is just extensions of our body and then also our mirrors, just as you said, right? So we're basically kind of extending ourselves to learn about ourselves in a strange way. But I feel that like artists are particularly equipped maybe to kind of show or like unearth things that not everybody can kind of perceive and like understand about technology. And speaking of this kind of shift towards, I guess some call it like in philosophy, some call it like post-humanism and like, you know, post-human condition. You also curated a lot of projects that were like robotics and computer engineering. And can you share, maybe you remember a couple of projects that stayed with you and why?
Right. Well, I mean, when we speak about robotics, I have to mention Chico McMurtry because I curated three of his projects, and these projects are full on. It's like a 15-day, 20-day full on experience where basically the first thing that I do is secure about 20 artists or students that can work with Chico to create his robotic machines. As you know, starting somewhere from the mid 2000s, he started working with inflatable robots.
Mhm.
So it's really beautiful to see these inflatable robots um, in a white space in a gallery space. So I curated the first one in Adelaide, and there were like 16 birds which were flying through this space, and it was really a mesmerizing experience. But in order to do that, we had to get artists, and then who had some skills, or teach them some skills in welding, sawing, all sorts of things in order to create this environment, and then make this work. And then I repeated the same system in Skopje in Macedonia with the students from the art school.
Mhm.
And then we presented the project at Çifte Hamam. Beautiful, beautiful project. And then in 2012, we did it in at the art gallery of the University of Manitoba, where you're based now.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that was quite an interesting experience. Yeah, first of all, like Chico McMurtry falls onto my mind, and then Bill Vaughan.
Mhm.
We had Bill Vaughan at one of the exhibitions I curated in Winnipeg, I think back in at the end of 2015. It was called The Age of Catastrophe, and he was
Okay. Yeah.
presenting his robots. Louis-Philippe Demers, who sometimes worked with Bill Vaughan as well. So, quite a few artists. Of course, Telarc as well, whose work is always incredibly impactful as he challenges our assumptions about the body, agency, and identity. So, in the last few years, I've really um, worked with him on several levels, curating his work, but also conceptually in discussions, publications, etc. I think the last was at the POM conference in Perth, where I presented his work and of course Eduardo Katz's work.
Mhm.
And then try to connect them with our favorite theme, Willem Flusser and Marshall McLuhan, the old Winnipeg-based Marshall McLuhan. So
Yeah.
I've worked, I've created projects like the BioArt, or different, BioArt exhibitions. Um, but I've always tried to extend it, to a situation where robots and artificial life aren't just tools, but they're partners in creation. And I think what stays with me is not the spectacle of technology, but the poetic intelligence the artists bring to it, the way machines and humans actually are in dialogue in a very creative sense. And that's where it really gets interesting.
Yeah, I do agree with this view because I feel a lot of the times when you see videos of these tech fairs, there's always the same, the robot, and it's always this like kind of female with like exaggerated like boobs. They always like look exactly the same, these robots. And there's really like kind of something sad about it, something kind of, I don't know, kind of empty about the whole thing. And then I feel whenever I see artists working with robotics, they really kind of bring this poetic view into picture, and they kind of change our perceptive of what, because artists change perspective of ordinary objects even, and then they also change perspective of technology, anything that really exists, or even nature, whatever, right? And I think it's, and then in this case they're changing perspective on robotics and robots, and I think that can have just as much, yeah, just like poetic and aesthetic value as working with anything else, if not more, right? Because we're only kind of sold, again, one really locked in perspective that's so, like non-inspiring in a sense. So I really appreciate that you always, that you're always kind of like working with artists that have the most kind of incredible like novel, like innovative approaches and methods and stuff. But speaking, because we mentioned now a couple of times Flusser and McLuhan, and I actually had a question about it, because in your VCA Art Forum talk, you quoted Bergson, and the quote is, "The idea that for a new object we might have to create new concepts is deeply repugnant to us." And because we met at the conference, well, actually, I came to a conference that you organized in Winnipeg on McLuhan and Flusser, especially their aesthetic theories. That was in 2012, I think, already. And speaking of, things that are kind of repugnant to us, Flusser wrote that true art is terrifying because it's new. And then McLuhan, of course, argued that art trains our perception for the hidden ground. So in a sense, also like terrifying things that we don't want to actually see. We kind of like, ignore really with like with our perception, because we don't want to see it. So yeah, art trains our perception for the hidden ground of culture. So what do you think is contemporary art's role in introducing new ways of seeing, and especially inviting us to face the terrifying and the repugnant?
Well, thank you for that complex question. I think on
I mean, I
first
don't think it
level,
works because you know the theorists very well and you've worked
yeah,
with
yeah.
this. I think,
Well,
yeah.
very well. I think art really is meant to unsettle us. Like, so that's like my first answer, and that's what I think is its primary role. It confronts us with the unfamiliar, the unexpected, right? But let me preface this with I mean, the reason why I did that conference on Marshall McLuhan and Willem Flusser was that I realized I came to Winnipeg in 2011, and that was the year. It was the 20th anniversary of Flusser's death and the 100th anniversary of McLuhan's birth.
Right.
And then I went to saw McLuhan's house as well, and all of that. But I realized that nothing was done in the city of Winnipeg in regard to celebrating McLuhan. Like, it was a crucial year, and really nothing. And then I said, "Oh my God!" So I proposed it to Video Pool that we should organize a conference on this theme, and they agreed, and thank God. And so I started thinking about this, and trying to connect the two thinkers. But I think also Bergson is important in this aspect. Because together with McLuhan and Flusser, they all point to this idea that art is sort of based on a perceptual training. Contemporary art invites us to dwell in an uncertainty, to face what we resist, and to sense hidden structures in society and culture. So the idea is that it doesn't just comfort, it sensitizes us to the transformation in a way that's often subtle but deeply powerful, I would say. So that's where I find the connection between these three thinkers. And of course, Bergson, his, I would say the most of his philosophy is concentrated around the idea of intuition, right? Of just intuition being higher than any type of thinking, than any type of intelligence. It's another level. And if we're able to connect to our intuition or just liberate the intuition, then we're really. I mean, Einstein is a perfect example where he just went into this deeply intuitive understanding of the universe, and he ended up with everything which changed our lives today. Nikola Tesla is another example. I mean, we could mention quite a few examples, but really the intuition brings us to these very, very subtle energies, which are very powerful.
I think intuition, I'm so glad you mentioned it because I think it's making a comeback actually. Because you mentioned Einstein and then like the Bergson talking about intuition and how important it is. And I think it's not like it's you said it's very important in arts, but I think it's becoming more and more obvious that it's also extremely important in science, and it's always been important in science. And even though during the modern period we kind of were under impression that the old idea of scientists being alchemists at the same time is now long gone, and everything is being very structured and very methodological and all those things. But I think that was always just an illusion in a sense. I think scientists always had to kind of especially those that created new concepts, new inventions, new perceptions, they had to be alchemists at the same time. And I think this idea is kind of returning, especially now with, as you said, AI, quantum physics and stuff, where things become kind of unclear. And like theory of consciousness is this huge milieu nowadays that are this kind of actually starting to really emerge in physics, kind of for the first time ever, because before it was more a domain of philosophy, right? And now finally physicists are talking about different ways of defining consciousness, right? But before and I want to talk a little bit about consciousness later on, I think, but before we do that, I want to talk a little bit more about just like AI and like the idea of using AI in your artwork, right? So you mentioned one of your favorite artists that's working with AI, Boris Ildekson. He recently, so he recently won World Photography Award for Pseudomnesia, the electrician. So this was a photograph that he generated with AI. And Ildekson famously rejected the award, and he kind of made a statement with that. And I think basically the artwork was actually the statement that he made with this. Can you tell me why he's one of your favorite ones working with AI?
Well, I mean, the award wasn't just any award. It was the Sony World Photography Award. It just like the top of photography. There's nothing higher. It's the Nobel Prize in photography, right? And it was given to him. But he did reject it and saying AI images are not photography at the same time. So I find this gesture as fascinating because by refusing the award, he reframed the entire event as the artwork.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So the AI image becomes secondary. The art is in the conversation, it is challenging institutions and in how the audience reflects on authenticity and all of that. But I think essentially it forces us to rethink what art is and what it could be in a digital age. So he did a huge favor to photographers.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, I would say to what Eduardo Katz did with Alba, the green fluorescent bunny rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole idea of Alba, I mean, Eduardo Katz didn't create Alba. It was INRA, the famous French lab, and he only had inroads with INRA because he was friends with Louis Beck, like the famous biologist, who also dabbled in arts and knew a lot of artists. So using that connection, Eduardo came up with this idea saying, well, and it wasn't even going to be a rabbit, it was going to be a dog, but it
Mm-hmm.
turned out to be too complicated, right? To do it. So then they started, they concentrated on a rabbit. And then the lab was able to produce this green fluorescent bunny rabbit, which did glow only in the dark. And you had to use equipment in order
Yeah,
to see that.
special circumstances.
Yeah, but it was and then the lab said, but Eduardo wanted to take the rabbit home to have it as a pet for his daughter. They created a room within his daughter's room and all of that. But the lab declined to do so because they said, well, wait a minute, we created the bunny rabbit, so it's ours, right? We can't give it to you. And it was regulations also that they couldn't give it
Yeah.
to him. But then what he did was he just started this whole campaign about freeing Alba and and all of that, and it ended up on the cover page of all of the like magazines like Le Monde and just
Mhm.
incredible favor to bioartists done by Eduardo Katz just by his action. So I think it's something similar. Boris Eldgassen is also doing this favor to artists who deal with photography, but also with AI art, because suddenly it became a really big thing.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think McLuhan said that communication is like people think they're communicating all the time, but they're actually never communicating anything. The only thing that matters about communication is the effect, right? And I think this is exactly the kind of contemporary artwork is much more focused on like the effect that something creates
Mhm.
rather than like the work itself. I mean, ever since even the fountain on and like other Dadaist works and stuff. Um, yeah, like I read something about so there's this artist Ahmed El Gamal who worked with AI, and he pointed out that actually the earlier AI models were trained or like could be trained on more like small artist specific data sets. And I mean, still nowadays you can do that, but like a lot of artists now use like bigger programs that use large prompt based systems, and those are like trained on billions of images just taken from the internet without any like real consent. And so this is like the copyright concern. Um, do you like I this conversation about AI? It's always like on one hand is like oh, the copyright, oh, they're stealing, or oh, this company. But I feel like as a phenomenologist, you're kind of like always more like you should kind of like observe like what's actually happening. And I think like could AI become one of the best tools that artists can use? Do you think? Especially because we don't really understand it that well yet. And I feel when you don't understand the tool, there's still much to explore to it in a sense.
Mhm. Well, yeah, I mean, you're pointing to a certain shift which affects creative autonomy,
Yeah.
and it affects it dramatically. It's not a light affecting of creative autonomy, but and earlier models allowed kind of a dialogue between a human and a machine, sort of a conversation. And you're right. Today, these massive data sets can overwhelm individual creativity, and they risk standardizing expression. So,
Yeah.
I mean, what happens is the artist's agency is challenged because these systems reproduce patterns without context or intention. So we risk losing the why behind art. The why is always the most important thing. And the intentional, the phenomenological dimension that gives meaning is somehow lost, I would say. But maybe through intuition we can bring it back.
Yeah, because you said like intuition, intention and intuition. I also like try to, when I teach my students, because I've been teaching contemporary art history, I'll do it again also this upcoming semester. And the first lecture is always what is art? And I feel like everybody's very confused about this question. Everybody, and there's a lot of answers just saying like, well, if you use your hands in some way, and if you just manage to produce something, that's art, right? So they, for example, don't a lot of the time students can't really explain why Banksy graffiti is art, but all the other graffiti that also kind of looks cool is not, so I definitely always then give them the Flusser essay on, the beautiful and the nice. I don't know if you remember how the terrifying novelty of thing, and as you said, art should be unsettling, right? So I always kind of like try to teach them in a sense that like, well, like art is supposed to move something in you that hasn't been maybe moved ever even. And so and in terms of like AI, I feel it's so true that we have to be so careful with with these things because they can kind of automize us in a sense. Like they can really kind of automize humans, and then like I feel this kind of environment is always artists, like real artists, thrive in it because they can really go against the against the grain of everybody else kind of becoming automated. And I feel it's always kind of been the same thing with technology. Like a lot of people kind of learn to use it in a conventional way, and then that creates ground for artists to like really kind of go against the grain. And I mean, I kind of expect the same thing happening with AI, that like, okay, most people will kind of become a little bit more automized and will kind of just use it for their own convenience, but there's going to be some amazing art created on the back of it.
The reason why you think they're similar, uh, arts and technology, is because they are. So, as you know, the ancient word techne meant uh, art, and it meant uh, technique, and it meant technology. It was the same thing. I mean, similar maybe to how the primary first discipline was philosophy, and then everything else split from philosophy, like mathematics, all sorts of other subjects. So I mean, and AI, it is really interesting because it strikes at the core of creative authorship. It's able to access quite a lot. We were never able to access as much as AI is today, but it reveals something about culture, that it is both parasitic, as you implied, but also revelatory, as phenomenology implies. And I think it's a big challenge, which isn't always about ethics. It isn't always about it being legal, but it is philosophical. And so, which would be the basic questions which we would have to be grappling with, defining, or working with. How do we define originality? What is original, right? How do we define authorship? And what is the creativity in an age of algorithmic recombination? So I think if we can answer these questions, we're on our way to understanding AI. Uh,
Yeah, I feel like we're that's kind of the function of art as well. And I mean, also philosophy, but I think especially art that is keep pushing these the definitions of the words, like is keep expanding them, or like not even expanding them, but like renegotiating them, in a sense, redefining them. I want to like return back to consciousness now. And this idea of conscious machine, right? So first of all, art is techne, right? Would you consider art as means to like expansion of consciousness? Whatever that means. It's intentionally vague, this question.
Well, I think yes, that definitely is. Art is one of the oldest technologies for expanding consciousness. If I can, come up with one sentence, that would be it. And it communicates, art communicates, but not just facts and not just information. What does it communicate? It communicates experience, which is quite important. So when we engage with a powerful artwork, our perception shifts. And we see, we feel, and we think, we behave differently. So that shift, as subtle as it may be, is precisely a form of expanded consciousness, I would say.
Yeah, and as phenomenologist, do you believe in kind of like a collective expansion of consciousness? I mean, I guess that's kind of what culture is, and like cultural expansion and I guess evolution or whatever. I don't know if you want to like actually add anything to this, but
Yeah, that's an interesting question, actually, about individualism and collectivism, and many artists have answered this in different ways, even by structure. So in ex-Yugoslavia, we had these like a phenomenon of art groups working together. So maybe because society was socialist, so therefore it was encouraged. But I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say that, for example, Irvin from Slovenia or Neue Slowenische Kunst were influenced that much by, like nobody told them, oh, you should work together. And,
by like
it just, there is,
communist
yeah,
ideologies.
there is a history of art groups, even before, communist Yugoslavia, even before. Like in the region, there is this feeling of collectivism. And for some reason, it works, and people want to see it. Artists want to work alongside other artists and show their work. I guess be challenged by different ideas. So it's uh, yeah, so it's quite interesting, this idea. Well, and also like your question reminds me of somehow of let's say these. Experiments in consciousness expansion, right? So I don't know if do you know of Gurdjieff? He was a Russian mystic who moved to France after the Russian Revolution. Um, Started a whole institute for the harmonious development of society, and a lot of artists, a lot of thinkers, a lot of people really became a part of the Gurdjieff group. But and really, I think he was basing it more on individual efforts, right? But then one of his students, later collaborator, Uspensky, changed the whole paradigm onto collective efforts. So, for example, one of their idea was, how do you attain, I would say only consciousness, but how do you become enlightened, right? And the whole, starting from Buddha onwards, it's yes, you go deep inside and you attain a bliss, right? You become fully conscious, or you become enlightened. And Gurdjieff, in a way, even though he really mixed quite many systems, was, let's say, a part of that line of thinking. But Uspensky said, no, it's not possible for a human being today to attain consciousness, bliss in that way. But we have to have people working together so that this happens. So, and also like he came up with the idea that no person is actually a single person, but within us, there are many different people, right? So like, I don't know, 16 people within us that think differently, that their vibration is different. So, but basically his whole idea was, uh, to uh, use the power of collectivism in order to achieve higher goals. Yeah, so that was a slight digression, but it was an interesting question, so I thought maybe my thought
No,
is taking
yeah,
me
that
there.
was great. Yeah, because I think this idea of, kind of ecosystems over the separate systems is also
Mm,
returning quite a lot. And in fact, this is also an idea that McLuhan was already exploring, decades ago. Um, but I feel, yeah, that it's definitely not a coincidence that when certain contemporary art phenomena happen, that there's like usually a bunch of performance artists that kind of start working. It's very rarely that we say, okay, this is the first one. I mean, we try to do that when we canonize and write like art history, but I feel it's almost like there's something in the air, as McLuhan also said, like artist is an antenna of the society, and then like if we take on maybe even like this a little bit this mystical view that like the atmosphere is like ready for like these new forms of art or whatever. And I feel like even though current atmosphere can seem a little kind of deeming and like not positive for a lot of people, I'm kind of hopeful that um that like cool stuff can come out of it, and like cool new ways of perception and stuff. um and yeah, on consciousness, right? I do wonder what you think about this, because I feel everybody that I've asked this question, depending in which discipline they work in, they have different answers to it. Do you think artificial machines could ever, like, wake up into consciousness? What's your opinion on this? It doesn't have to be very, professionally profound or
mm.
anything like that, but just as a thought experiment, I guess.
Yeah, well, well, thanks for mentioning McLuhan, and in this context, he did say that something along the lines that art is a distant warning system, which is telling society of what is to happen to it, and we've seen that quite a lot. Um, Waking up into consciousness, that's a big question, isn't it? So, if machines ever wake up, I suspect it wouldn't look like human consciousness. Um, and as far as the machine part goes, it could be something entirely other, emerging from different sensory or cognitive architectures. And the challenge won't be just whether machines are conscious, but whether they can recognize consciousness or recognize it when it happens.
Like, you mean
Uh,
whether humans can recognize it when it happens in machines?
well, both. Whether machines
Yeah.
can recognize it, like self-recognize it, and whether humans can recognize that the machines have become conscious.
Yeah.
But I think perhaps the bigger realization is um, that we would then realize that our own consciousness was never as self-contained or as unique as we thought. You know,
Yeah.
how we've always given, man especially, this crowning position, but now we're sort of realizing that it is not. But then let me just go back to machine about machines waking up or even solving some uh, bigger problems. We mentioned surveillance and all that.
Mm.
I don't, yeah, it's machines are changing. Machines are, as we mentioned before, AI is merging with biotechnology, with biology. And we do not know where this will take. So once machines acquire this biological sense of being of being, then perhaps consciousness will become a bigger part of who they are. Because somehow I feel that in order for something to be conscious in the way that we understand it, it would have to be biological.
Yeah. Okay.
And machines are starting to move towards the biological. So therefore, I would say that it is possible. Of course, after the biological, they would have to bring on the, more sensory or sentient um, feeling around themselves, beings, understanding that they are that, and then at the end, acquiring intuition. So I think several levels before they can wake up into consciousness in the way that we understand it.
Yeah. I think this is a really good way to put it, because obviously the way that artificial intelligence, I mean, like, it's already a problem of labeling all these things the way we label them. We label them, artificial intelligence, computer memory. Like, we already give them these like human kind of like characteristics, and in order to perhaps present them as more powerful than they are, or like as something different than they are. But I've heard like a good argument for why the machines would have to become, or like go more into biological realm if they need to have consciousness, and is by this, I don't know if you've heard of Federico Fagin. He's Italian physicist, and he has this theory of consciousness, that consciousness is basically consciousness is first, and then the matter is just it's just a kind of interpretation of consciousness that's like all enhancing. But the reason why he said computers, as we have them now, can never become conscious is because they're incoherent on quantum level, but human cells are coherent on quantum level. So in a sense, every human cell has a knowledge what all the other cells in the body are doing. So it's like way more holistic, or even like holographic. The organism is like holographic in that sense. And it's not something that we can actually repeat in artificial machines. But if we were to maybe like, use like grow cells and like neural links and so on, then that quantum coherence would, I guess, be like written into the tissues, or like, the hardware, right, of the machine. And that way, like, some sort of consciousness, which is basically just that each part has a knowledge of all the other parts, would be like more possible. So I like, maybe for the end, if you have a response to this theory.
Well, I don't have a response to this theory. I have to think about it. We actually had with the DAC committee of CGRAPH just a few days ago. We had a really big session on quantum and the quantum consciousness and the art.
Yeah.
And so people just approached it from different aspects. And it yeah, so I mean, we don't have the time now to go into it, but I would encourage you to go to the session. But in the end, I mean, just with just by asking some questions, like philosophical questions, I sort of got the impression that um, it's not only with AI, but also with quantum and research of quantum, which has been around since, I don't know, 120 years, and we still haven't even scratched the essence of it. So I think we're going to need more people like Leonardo,
Mm.
because well, let's say he's one of the paradigms, right? Of what a human being can be, right? Uh, a scientist, a technologist, an artist, and all of that together, right? Because I think he went to the roots, as we mentioned, art and technology, coming from the same root of techne, and I would even say the Aristotelian idea of uh, in the philosophers in ancient Greece had this idea that objects had to first exist in the realm of ideas,
Mm. Yeah.
and then they're dragged down into the realm of the sensory, of the material.
Mhm.
It is not possible for something to exist here if it didn't exist there, right? And I
Mm.
think that, and I think that's where intuition and people like Bergson can come in handy, because they can just show us the patterns of how we can access these objects, ideas, before they're being materialized. I
Mm.
think that is what we're missing at this
Mm.
point. So I think if we're able to reestablish that connection to the past, or past thinkers to past ideas of this way, then we're able to um, to come up with some different breakthroughs. I mean, you mentioned the idea um, of alchemy in a context
Mm.
before, and but like, even if we look into, let's say, contemporary philosophers, right? So, like, well, contemporary, but I mean, philosophers on whose thinking contemporary philosophy is now formed. For example, Hegel, right?
Mm.
So in Hegel, we see the basic idea in itself is becoming an idea for itself. What is that? That is pure alchemy. Like, if
Yeah,
you think about
definitely.
it, it is
Mm.
pure alchemy. So he understood these processes, and of course, alchemy is something we have completely erased. Uh, Chemistry has become the big discipline. Uh, Alchemy has become something which is really not to be bothered with. But if Hegel took that basic alchemic idea and created contemporary philosophy, then maybe we should go back to it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to end this. Yeah. Thanks so much, Melinti. This was so great. Thanks for taking the time.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Monica. It was good to reconnect with you and the University of Manitoba and Winnipeg, my favorite city.
I know you miss us dearly, and I hope you do get back at some point, either for like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
short stay or a short project or for some long job. I don't know. I would love to
Well,
see you
or
here in a role of creative director again.
well, that would be great. Let's well, I mean, if not, if nothing else, then maybe when we have a SIGGRAPH conference in LA or something, then I can just fly over to Winnipeg and meet with you guys. The problem is these conferences happen summertime, and usually people are away summertime. So,
Yeah, that's true. We'll figure something out to get you here,
yeah.
Melinti.
Guest on this episode Beyond the Prompt was Dr. Melentie Pandilovski. Host was Monica Vričar. Recording was produced by University of Manitoba's Faculty of Arts Media Lab. Editing was done by Akamjit Singh and Monica Vričar. This podcast is sponsored by Strategic Initiatives Support Fund and University of Manitoba's Faculty of Arts.